I've never really liked early mornings, especially not in this house. The air is always damp and quiet, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. But this morning, as the sunlight filtered through the magnolia trees lining the Reeves estate, I felt a knot tightening low in my stomach. It had only been 2 weeks since my father died, but everything already felt different. Not just quiet, but tilted like the ground beneath me was waiting to split open. My name is Malene Reeves, though most people just call me Maddie. I'm 34 years old, born and raised here in Charleston, and for most of my life, I was the quiet one in the family, the one who stayed when everyone else left. My brother chased success across state lines, my friends built families of their own, and I stayed. I took care of my father as his health declined. I managed the house. I kept the family legacy breathing when everyone else treated it like an old photo album they could close and forget. This house, Reeves House, isn't just wood and stone. It's blood history, whispered secrets. My father built this place brick by brick, planting white rose bushes the year I got engaged, swearing they'd bloom for my wedding photos. They did. The roses outlasted the marriage. Holden, my ex-husband, left me a year after the ceremony for his secretary. Her name was Trisha. I still remember the sound of her laughter in the back of our wedding reception. I had told myself back then it was harmless. That's what you do when you love someone. You excuse the early signs of the betrayal that's already blooming underneath. You water it yourself. And one day, when it wraps around your throat, you tell yourself you should have seen it coming. This morning, she showed up in my garden. Not at the front gate. Not with flowers or condolences. No, she showed up in stilettos. Lou Bowen's. I heard the crunch of her heels on the gravel before I even looked up. That sound was deliberate, sharp, and entitled, like someone knocking on a door they already believe belongs to them. I kept pruning the roses, pretending I didn't hear her at first. The white petals brushed against my fingers like ghosts of a past that refused to leave me alone. Well. Her voice dripped with saccharine venom still playing in the dirt, Maddie. The name rolled off her tongue like an insult, as if she was savoring it. I didn't answer. Instead, I clipped a thorny branch, careful not to crush the petals. The thorn pricked my glove, and I welcomed the sting. It was something real in a morning that already felt like a performance. You know why I'm here, she added, stepping closer, her shadow falling across the flower bed like a storm cloud. The reading of the will is tomorrow, and Holden and I thought it best to settle things civilly. Civilly, God, the way she said it made my jaw ache. I finally turned toward her, wiping my hands on my apron. There's nothing to settle. This is my father's home. Our home, she corrected, lips curling into a smirk. And since Holden was like a son to James for 15 years, we believe we're entitled to our fair share. Her words were smooth, practiced like a woman who'd rehearsed them in front of a mirror. My grip on the pruning shears tightened. The same Holden who cheated on me with you, I asked, my voice low but steady. She shrugged, all mock innocence. Ancient history. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she said it like betrayal was something that just expired, like a carton of milk. My father wouldn't leave him anything I said. He wasn't stupid. Her smile flickered then, just for a second. We'll see about that, she said, pivoting sharply on her heels. You might want to start packing. We'll need at least a month to renovate once we move in. And just like that, she turned her back on me, on this house, on my father's memory, as if it was already hers. Her car disappeared down the driveway, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive perfume and that bitter metallic taste in the air that betrayal always leaves behind. I looked down. A rose petal had been crushed in my palm, white but streaked with red from where the thorn had caught me. My father used to say white roses meant new beginnings. This morning, all I could see was war. I don't remember how long I stood there, my hands trembling, not from fear but from the heat of something far older. Rage. Not the loud, explosive kind, but the quiet, slow kind that hums in your bones like a storm gathering strength. As I knelt to gather the fallen petals, something caught my eye. A small envelope half buried beneath the rose bush. Its edges were damp with dew, but the handwriting on it was unmistakable. My father's. To Maddie. My breath hitched. My father's script had always been deliberate, confident, like everything he touched. I brushed the dirt off, carefully holding it like something fragile, something sacred. The paper was heavier than I expected. He had left me something. Not in the will. Not through lawyers, directly. Secretly. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called the only person I trusted with something like this. Trisha just paid me a visit, I said the moment Danielle Cooper picked up. Danielle has been my best friend since law school, the kind of woman who doesn't flinch at a storm, but rather leans into it with a glass of wine. She's worse than we thought, I added. I'll be there in 20, Danielle said, not even hesitating. And I'm bringing wine. True to her word, she arrived with a bottle of Pinot Noir in one hand and her leather briefcase in the other. We sat in my father's study, the one with the tall windows and the oak desk he'd built himself decades ago. The smell of old books and cigar smoke still clung to the walls. A part of me hated how empty it felt without him. You haven't opened it yet, she asked, eyeing the envelope. I wanted to wait for you, I admitted. Then let's see what he left you. My hands were trembling as I broke the seal. Inside, folded neatly, was a letter. And a small brass key. Dear Maddie. I read my father's voice echoing in my mind with every word. If you're reading this, someone's already made a move on the estate. Knowing human nature, I'm guessing it's Trisha. She always reminded me of a shark. All teeth, no soul. Danielle let out a quiet, humorless chuckle into her wineglass. The key enclosed opens the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, you'll find everything you need to protect what's yours. Remember what I taught you about chess? Sometimes you sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen. Love always, Dad. I looked up at Danielle, my throat tight. She was already unlocking the drawer. He came to me 6 months ago, she said softly right after his diagnosis. He knew exactly how this would play out. The drawer clicked open. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a USB drive. She handed them to me like they were a weapon. There's more, she added. 3 days before he died, your dad added a modification to his will. A clause. One that's going to change everything. What kind of clause? I asked. She gave me a small, dangerous smile, the kind that sets a trap. We spread the contents of the envelope across the desk. Surveillance photos, bank statements, email printouts. One photo in particular made my stomach turn. Trisha in a dark parking lot handing something to a man in a suit. He didn't just hope for the best, Danielle said. He planned for the worst. The house felt different that night, colder. Not like the absence of warmth, but like something was waiting, like a blade hidden beneath velvet. I sat in that study long after Danielle left, the letter still in my lap, the evidence spread out before me like a map of everything I hadn't seen. Somewhere between grief and fury, I could feel something shifting inside me. My father hadn't just loved me, he'd trusted me, enough to make me his queen on the board. When the knock came on the front door just after 9, I was already expecting it. My brother, Aaron Reeves, stood there. His usually polished exterior was cracked, his designer suit, rumpled eyes hollowed from lack of sleep. In his hands, he held a worn leather portfolio like a shield. You look terrible, I said quietly. Playing double agent isn't as glamorous as the movies make it out to be, he muttered with a half smile. I stepped aside. He walked into the study, his gaze sweeping over the spread of evidence on the desk before settling into the chair across from me. I see you found Dad's insurance policy, he said. Why didn't you tell me what you were doing? I demanded, sharper than I intended. The wound between us was still fresh, unhealed. Because I had to make things right, he said, voice low. After what I did during your divorce. Siding with Holden. Ignoring how they humiliated you. I was wrong, Maddie, and I knew it. He opened the portfolio and pulled out a check. My eyes widened. $500,000. That's what Trisha offered me, he said, to testify that Dad wasn't of sound mind when he changed his will. I looked at him, my pulse thudding. But you didn't take it, I said slowly. No, Aaron whispered. I took it straight to Dad, told him everything. His voice cracked then, just slightly. You should have seen his face. Not angry, just disappointed. That hurt worse than if he'd yelled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. I recorded everything. Meetings, threats, even Trisha's voice on tape. Want to hear what she said? He pressed play. So once the old man kicks it, we'll contest the will. Aaron, you'll testify about his mental state, Holden's history with him. We'll make the case. Maddie won't know what hit her. My hands clenched into fists as Holden's voice followed, cold and smug. We'll sell the house, liquidate everything. Maddie can go back to her little gardening business. She never deserved any of it anyway. Turn it off, I whispered. Aaron did, and then he pulled out one more document. His eyes were steady now, as if he had been carrying this weight for too long. This is why I came tonight, he said quietly. Trisha didn't just want money. She wanted revenge. I stared at my brother for a long time. The silence between us stretched so thin I could almost hear it crackle in the air. Revenge. The word slid across the room like a blade against glass. It wasn't surprising. Trisha was always the kind of woman who couldn't stand losing, not to anyone, but especially not to me. She didn't just want the estate. She wanted to erase me from the narrative like I'd been some supporting character in her story all along. For what I finally whispered, though deep down I already knew. Aaron lowered his eyes. For making Holden feel guilty. For embarrassing them when you caught them together. For not disappearing quietly like she expected. The memory hit me like a brick to the chest. My old bedroom, the soft amber light filtering through the curtains, the scent of my father's garden just outside. I'd walked in early that afternoon with a box of macarons from a little French bakery downtown, thinking I'd surprise my husband. I thought love was about small gestures, about being the kind of wife who showed up. But when I opened that door, I saw his hands on her. Her hair splayed across my pillow. Her smile, God, that smile. It wasn't the guilty, startled kind you might expect from someone caught in betrayal. It was triumphant. As if she'd been waiting for me to walk in. As if this was the real wedding she'd been planning all along. The sound that escaped my throat that day wasn't even human. It was something broken. Something animal. I remember Holden standing there, not apologizing, not explaining, just staring. Trisha wrapped herself in the silk throw I'd picked out with my mother before she passed. She tilted her head at me and said, "Guess now you know." That was it. I walked out that night barefoot, my wedding ring still on my heart, torn somewhere between rage and disbelief. And ever since, she's carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she'd won. Aaron's voice broke through the memory. She started embezzling from Dad's company 6 months before his diagnosis. That's when everything began. He found out just before the doctors gave him the news. That's when he started planning all this. I felt the air leave my lungs. My father had been preparing for this long before I ever realized what was coming. And that more than anything hurt. Because while I was drowning in grief, he had been fighting a war in silence. My brother's voice softened. He didn't tell you because he didn't want to worry you. He wanted to protect you, but he also wanted to give you the final move. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of those words settle in. My father didn't raise me to be fragile. He raised me to be still, to listen, to know when the board was shifting. And now, I could finally feel the weight of the game he'd set in motion. Aaron shifted in his chair. He asked me to help, to keep an eye on them. I recorded meetings, collected files. Everything is ready for tomorrow. Tomorrow, the will reading. It wasn't just going to be a legal formality. It was going to be a reckoning. I exhaled slowly, staring at the pile of evidence on the desk. Photos of Trisha in dark parking lots, transfers and hidden accounts, whispered conversations captured on Aaron's phone. Every page was another thread in the net my father had woven around her. Around them. I don't just want to win, I said finally, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from the sharp edge of clarity. I want them to know exactly who they underestimated. Aaron nodded once, as if he understood the gravity of what I wasn't saying out loud. We were no longer just grieving children. We were generals in a war our father had prepared us for. The next morning came too fast. The sunlight poured through the tall windows of my father's study like it always did, warm and golden, but I felt nothing of its warmth. My stomach churned like there was a storm brewing under my ribs. Danielle arrived early, hair pulled into a sleek bun, her black suit pressed so sharply it could cut glass. She placed the legal folders on the oak desk as if she were setting down the final pieces of a puzzle. "You ready?" she asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to crawl back into the comfort of being the quiet daughter who tended roses and let the world pass her by. But those days were gone the moment Trisha stepped onto my gravel path in designer heels. "Yes," I said, "let's end this." Outside, the sound of tires on gravel announced her arrival before I even saw her. Trisha stepped out of the sleek black car, dressed like a widow in a tailored black dress, a string of pearls around her neck. The way she adjusted her hair for the camera made my stomach twist. Because of course she'd brought a camera crew. She actually hired a crew, Aaron muttered from behind me. She wants to look gracious, Danielle said dryly. She's filming her own coronation. Through the window we watched as she did a walkthrough with the cameraman, gesturing dramatically toward the front porch and the chandelier. Her smile was too wide, her voice too sweet. She believed today was the day she'd claim everything she'd taken from me once before. She has no idea, Aaron said quietly. Danielle straightened the stack of documents. Good. When Trisha finally swept into the study, the scent of expensive perfume filled the air like smoke in a burning room. She was radiant in the way only someone with unearned confidence can be. Holden trailed behind her in a stiff suit, his smile tight, his eyes darting around like a man who already smelled trouble but didn't know where it would come from. Hello, Malene, Trisha said with mock graciousness, like she was doing me a favor just by using my name. I didn't respond, I just held her gaze. Danielle stood, her voice clear and formal. As legal representative of the late James Reeves, I will now read his last will and testament along with any supplementary documents. Trisha clasped her hands in front of her, turning slightly toward the camera crew. She was ready to smile through every word, ready for the scene that would become her victory speech. The will began predictably. Minor bequests to distant cousins, donations to charities my father had quietly supported for years. My chest ached hearing those familiar names, reminders of the man who always planned carefully. Then Danielle's voice shifted slightly, signaling the moment Trisha had been waiting for. To my daughter Malene Reeves, 60% of all estate assets, including the family home business shares and remaining financial holdings. To my former son-in-law Holden Barrett and his current wife Trisha Barrett, a combined share totaling 40%. Her face lit up like a starburst. She grabbed Holden's arm, squeezing, whispering something too low to hear. I knew it, she said under her breath. But Danielle didn't stop reading. However, she said, her tone sharpening, a conditional trust integrity clause was added 3 days before Mr. Reeves's passing. Acceptance of any portion of the estate is contingent upon a full review of financial activity and personal conduct both prior to and immediately following the amendment. Trisha's smile froze. Her hand on Holden's arm stiffened. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded. Holden leaned forward, frowning. What kind of clause? Danielle didn't answer. She simply broke the seal on the second envelope. The sound was sharp in the silence. She laid out the contents on the desk one by one like a surgeon exposing a wound. Surveillance photos, signed bank records, printed emails, and then finally the USB drive. These documents, she said evenly, were gathered by Mr. Reeves and verified by legal counsel. They contain evidence of financial misconduct, attempted bribery, and efforts to manipulate the contents of this will. Trisha's hand shot out, snatching a photo off the table. Her face went pale. Where did you get this? She hissed. Aaron stepped forward. His voice was steady, cold. Dad had you followed, recorded your meetings, your phone calls. He knew exactly what you were doing. For the first time that morning, Trisha looked genuinely rattled. She glanced at the camera crew, at Holden, back at me. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Oh no, I said softly. You wanted them here, remember? You wanted to make history. And in that moment, the tide turned, not with a bang, but with a quiet shift in the air, the way a predator realizes too late that it's been the prey all along. Her eyes darted to the camera crew. For a split second, panic flashed across her carefully sculpted features, a tiny fracture in the perfect mask she'd spent years crafting. She straightened her posture almost instantly, but the damage was already there, a flicker of fear. She hadn't expected this. Turn those cameras off, she barked, suddenly, voice sharper than the silk around her throat. But no one moved. Not the lead cameraman, not his assistant. They just stood there, unsure. This wasn't the polished, glorious footage she had promised them. This was raw, this was ugly, and it was all being documented in the house she thought she was about to claim. Danielle's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. Under the CTIC Conditional Trust Integrity Clause, if any party is found guilty of manipulating the testator or misrepresenting intentions with malicious intent, their portion of the estate is revoked, effective immediately. Aaron's voice followed, quieter but carrying far more weight. You lose everything. Trisha turned toward Holden as if he could save her, but his face was blank, stunned. The man who once stood so confidently beside her, now looked like someone who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't ground at all. It was quicksand. "This is a setup," she spat at me, venom returning, as she tried to claw her way out of the hole she had dug. "You planned this!" I didn't move. I didn't even blink. "No," I said softly, almost like a confession. "Dad did." Holden stepped forward suddenly, his hand shaking as he grabbed a bank statement off the table. His eyes darted across the lines, recognizing his own signature in places he clearly didn't expect to see it used. "Where did you get all this?" he demanded. "From the drawer," I said calmly. "The one Dad told me about in the letter he left for me." "You remember the letter you weren't supposed to see?" Danielle's gaze flicked to the camera crew. "Everything you've said, everything you've done is on the record now. This isn't just a will reading. This is evidence." Trisha's voice cracked. "You can't do this. We've already signed the acceptance papers." "Exactly," Danielle said smoothly. "By signing, you activated the clause. And the clause states that if fraud is discovered after the acceptance, all inheritance claims are nullified, and the entire record becomes public." The room was silent, except for the faint clicking of one of the cameraman's rigs. Trisha's head snapped toward Holden, her whisper, harsh, panicked, "Do something." But Holden looked like a man whose empire had just turned to ash. His mouth opened, then closed. He said nothing. "You were so confident," I said, and though my voice was quiet, it carried through the room with the precision of a blade. "So sure you had everyone fooled." "I did everything for him," she snapped, voice high and sharp, now pointing at Holden like she could shift the guilt onto him. "I helped him build a new life." Aaron stepped forward, his jaw tight. "You helped yourself to his money, his company, his dignity, and then you tried to rewrite history." Her face twisted. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand," I cut her off, my voice low. "I understand perfectly. You thought this house, this legacy, this family was something you could steal. Like a handbag, like a name." She slammed her palm against the desk, making some of the photos scatter. "Turn those damn cameras off!" she shouted again, her voice breaking this time. "I don't think they work for you anymore," I said. The lead cameraman just kept filming. This was no longer the victory reel she promised them. It was the slow, spectacular implosion of a woman who had mistaken arrogance for power. Danielle reached for the final document, her movements unhurried. Per the clause she read, Mr. Reeves designated his daughter Malene Reeves as the sole heir to the estate with a private trust fund established for his son Aaron Reeves. Trisha and Holden Barrett receive nothing except the legal consequences of their actions. For the first time, Trisha's mask shattered completely. Her chair toppled behind her as she stood up too fast, her face drained of color. Her hands shook as she pointed at me, at Danielle, at anyone who would listen. "You can't do this to me," she screamed. But no one answered. She stormed toward the door, her heels slamming against the hardwood like the desperate steps of someone trying to outrun a story that was already written. Holden followed behind her shoulders, hunched silent, like a man who finally realized he'd bet everything on the wrong queen. When the door slammed shut behind them, it was as if the entire house exhaled. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was satisfied. Danielle leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Your father would have loved that ending," she murmured. I didn't laugh. I just breathed. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like the air was pressing against my chest. "Yeah," I whispered, "he really would have." Aaron walked to the window, watching as Trisha's black car rolled down the long driveway like a hearse. "She's going to try something," he said. "Slander lawsuits." "She can try," Danielle interrupted. "But she's the one on camera. She's the one who signed the clause. And she's the one with her fingerprints on every dirty deal your father caught." I let the words sink in. It wasn't just a legal victory. This was something else, something quieter. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. That evening, after the storm of the morning had finally begun to fade, I found myself standing alone in the garden again. The same garden where it all began. The air smelled of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth. The white roses stood tall, glistening with the last drops of afternoon rain. It's strange how places hold memory. The gravel path still echoed the sound of Trisha's heels, though she was long gone. The rosebush, where I'd found the letter, rustled in the breeze like it was proud of what it had kept hidden. Aaron appeared behind me, his steps quiet. He didn't say anything at first. Neither of us needed to. The war was over. He held a small rosebush in a black plastic pot. A red one this time, not white. "Thought we could plant something new," he said. I knelt down beside him, fingers digging into the damp soil. It felt grounding, real honest. No lawyers, no signatures, no clauses, just earth. We worked in silence, the sound of the shovel scraping against the dirt blending with the soft rustle of leaves. When we were done, the new rosebush stood tall beside the old white ones, a scarlet streak in a sea of ivory. Bold, unapologetic. Aaron cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything. For siding with Holden. For not seeing who they were. For not protecting you when I should have." I brushed the soil from my palms and stood beside him. "I know," I said simply, "and I forgive you." The garden didn't need grand declarations, it was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a warm lavender light spread across the sky. I remembered how my father used to stand in this very spot every evening, hands in his pockets, breathing in the scent of the roses like it was the only air that mattered. He planned everything, even this. He didn't just leave me a house, he left me a reminder of strength, of legacy, of quiet power. People often say revenge is about getting even, but standing here watching the last light fade across the garden, I knew they were wrong. Revenge isn't about noise, it isn't about shouting or chaos. It's about taking back the story they thought they could write without you. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in my father's old bedroom, the ceiling fan whirring softly above me, like an old clock keeping time with my thoughts. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that hurt anymore. It was a silence that settled over everything, like the last note of a song, gentle, unshakable, final. I kept replaying the image of Trisha's face when she realized the cameras she hired would become her undoing. How her carefully painted smile cracked, how her confidence shattered into something raw and frantic. She had always been good at wearing masks, but my father had known the truth all along. That was his gift. He didn't raise his voice to crush you, he let your own lies do the job for him. I rolled onto my side, my fingers brushing the small brass key on the nightstand, the same one that had opened his desk drawer. That single key had changed everything. Not just the fate of this house, but the way I saw myself. For years, I had been the quiet daughter, the caretaker, the woman everyone thought would never fight back. Even Holden used to say it in that calm, condescending tone of his that I wasn't built for conflict, that I was too soft. But softness is not weakness. My father knew that. He had taught me that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is strategy. The next morning, I walked down the long hallway, my bare feet on the polished wood floors that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and rose water. My father's study door stood open, and the early light spilled in across the oak desk where everything had unfolded just hours earlier. The manila envelope was still there. The photos, the USB, the pieces of a story that Trisha had never thought anyone would bother to put together. Aaron was already there, standing by the window with a mug of black coffee. He looked exhausted but lighter, as if some invisible weight had been peeled off his shoulders overnight. "She's already called 3 people," he said without turning around. "The crew told me. She's trying to control the narrative." I let out a quiet breath. Of course she was. That's what people like Trisha do. They twist the truth, bend it until it fits the version of the world where they're still the victim. "She won't win," I said softly. Aaron turned to look at me. "You sound sure." I met his gaze, because for the first time I am. For so long I had been living in the shadow of their choices. Holden's betrayal, Trisha's cruelty, my own silence. But today they were standing in the shadow of my father's truth. Danielle arrived, not long after, sharp as always, a faint smile pulling at the corner of her lips. She set her briefcase down on the desk like she owned the air in the room. "Trisha's lawyer called me," she said. "She's bluffing. She's hoping you'll be scared enough to offer a settlement." I raised an eyebrow. "A settlement?" "She's claiming the clause was coercive," Danielle explained. "That your father manipulated her into signing something she didn't understand." I laughed. Not a bitter laugh this time, but a short, sharp, almost disbelieving sound. "She hired a camera crew to film herself accepting the terms." "Exactly," Danielle said, grinning now. "Every angle, every word, every smug look. She can't spin that. It's all in her own footage. She buried herself." Aaron sipped his coffee, the corner of his mouth lifting. "She doesn't realize she's already lost." "No," I said quietly. "She just doesn't know how to live without winning." Later that afternoon, I walked through the house slowly, room by room, the way you trace the lines of an old wound. My father's leather chair still had a faint indentation in it. His pipe sat on the bookshelf like a relic from a life I still half expected to hear downstairs. The walls here carried whispers. I could almost hear his voice steady, deliberate, never rushed. He'd always said rage burns fast, strategy lasts. As I passed the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection, same dark hair, same eyes, but different somehow. Sharper, grounded. Not the woman who cried in silence after her husband betrayed her. Not the woman who avoided confrontation for the sake of keeping the peace. I was no longer a supporting character. I walked outside to the garden again, drawn to it like a thread tugging at my chest. The white roses swayed gently in the wind. Their petals were soft, but their stems stood firm, each thorn unapologetic. The red rose Aaron and I had planted yesterday was already opening, slightly defiant against the crisp air. My father used to tell me roses teach lessons if you're patient enough to listen. White was for beginnings. Red was for battles survived. I closed my eyes and let the air fill my lungs. The garden had become my confession booth, my battlefield, and my sanctuary all at once. And then, as if on cue, the crunch of tires echoed down the driveway again. My spine stiffened. It was too soon for this kind of peace. I turned toward the gate and saw the black car, the same one. Trisha stepped out this time without the pearls, without the glossy hair curled to perfection. She wore sunglasses too big for her face, and a black coat wrapped tightly around her as if it could hold together everything that had started to unravel inside her. I didn't move to meet her halfway. I let her walk the entire length of the gravel path, the same path where she had smirked at me days ago. The same path where she had planted her imagined victory. When she stopped in front of me, she ripped the sunglasses off. Her eyes were red, not from grief, from rage. "You think this is over," she hissed. I didn't flinch. It already is. Her hands trembled as she jabbed a finger toward the house. "That should have been ours. You know it. Holden knows it. Everyone knows it." I tilted my head. "No, everyone knows it was my father's. You just forgot that part." Her lips quivered, but not with sadness, with fury. She had spent so long living in a world where taking from others was second nature. But this house was not a purse she could snatch. It was a legacy carved in stone, protected by the one man she could never outplay. "You humiliated me," she spat, "in front of everyone." I met her gaze steadily. "No, Trisha, you did that to yourself." Something flickered in her eyes, then not regret, never regret, just the realization that she couldn't change the ending anymore. She stepped closer. "I'll drag this through the courts if I have to. You think you've won, but I'll ruin you. I'll ruin this place." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even step back. I simply said try. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't defiance. It was the simple, solid truth of a woman who no longer feared her. Because this time she wasn't walking into a house with hidden corners and easy prey. She was walking into a fortress built by a man who had always been 10 steps ahead of her. And now that fortress was mine. Trisha's jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought she might scream again, might break into some hysterical tirade like the day of the will reading. But she didn't. She just took a shaky breath, turned on her heel, and walked away. This time she didn't look back. That night, Aaron and I sat on the porch, a bottle of our father's favorite bourbon between us. The night air was cool, the stars scattered faintly above the old oak trees. Crickets filled the spaces where words didn't need to go. "She'll keep fighting," Aaron said eventually. "I know. You're not scared." I took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread down my throat. "I've spent too many years being scared of people who didn't deserve my fear." He was quiet after that. But I could feel the way the weight had shifted between us. No longer me standing behind him, in family matters, but beside him. My father hadn't just given me a house, he'd handed me back my spine. "Dad would be proud," Aaron said softly. I smiled faintly, feeling the sting of tears behind my eyes. Yeah, he would. In the garden, the red rose caught the moonlight, glowing faintly like a promise. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me was steady again. The following days felt strange. Not peaceful, not yet, but quiet in a way that made me realize how long I had been living under someone else's storm. The house had always been heavy with memory, but now it carried something different. It wasn't grief alone, it was strength, my father's strength. The legal aftermath was everything Danielle predicted. Trisha and Holden tried. Of course they did. First came the angry calls from their lawyer, then the threats to go public. then a clumsy attempt to paint themselves as victims to the local press. Danielle intercepted every single move with the calm precision of a woman who had already played this game to the end. "She's burning her own bridge," Danielle said one morning over coffee at the long kitchen table. "Every letter she sends, every statement she gives, only proves she's digging in the wrong direction. Your father's clause was airtight." Aaron leaned against the counter, half smiling over his mug. "She doesn't understand she's already lost. She's still fighting ghosts." I stared out the window at the garden while they talked, the morning light spilling over the white roses like honey. Ghosts, yes, but they weren't mine anymore. When I was married to Holden, everything in this house had been muffled. My voice, my laughter, my presence. I tiptoed through my own life, trying not to disturb the fragile balance of a man who loved control more than he ever loved me. And Trisha, she had been a shadow at first, a whisper at work, a friend, then a presence I could no longer ignore. They took pieces of me one quiet day at a time, but they hadn't realized my father had been quietly building a wall around what mattered most, not out of bitterness but out of love. On the third morning, I found Aaron in the greenhouse. He was watering the new red rose we had planted together. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair a mess, but there was something softer about him now. The bitterness that used to harden his features seemed to have peeled away. "Hey," I said softly, stepping inside. He looked up and smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen since before everything broke between us. "She's trying to subpoena the footage," he said dryly. I laughed under my breath. "She can try. It's her footage. She filmed her own downfall." Aaron shook his head. "You know, Dad always said she'd overplay her hand." I didn't believe him. I thought he was being paranoid. But he saw her more clearly than any of us did. "Dad always did," I said. For a moment, the only sound was water trickling into the soil. I leaned against the old wooden frame of the greenhouse and watched the light catch the glass above us. "Do you ever feel guilty?" he asked suddenly. I frowned. "Guilty about what?" He lowered his eyes. "About winning. About taking everything back. I know they were monsters, Maddie. I know what they did. But sometimes when I see her fall apart like that, I remember what it felt like when I screwed up too. And I wonder if this is too much." I stepped closer slowly, carefully, because guilt has a way of creeping in, even when justice has been served. I reached out and touched his arm gently. "Dad didn't destroy her, Aaron," I said. "She did that to herself. He just made sure the truth had teeth." Aaron's jaw tensed, then softened. "Yeah, I guess you're right. She wanted everything that wasn't hers. She thought love, legacy, loyalty were trophies she could steal. But what she never understood is that what we have here," I gestured toward the house, the roses, the greenhouse, "was never about money. It was about belonging, and she never belonged here." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad you stayed, you know. All those years when I ran from this place, I thought you were weak for staying. But I see it now. You were the strongest one." My chest tightened at his words. For years, I'd felt like the forgotten one. The caretaker. The quiet sister. To hear him say this now felt like something I didn't know I needed. We stood there a while longer, just breathing the greenhouse air heavy with soil and life and memory. The legal fight didn't last long. In the end, Danielle dismantled every desperate motion Trisha's team filed. The footage, the documents, the signed acceptance papers, every piece lined up exactly as my father had designed. Trisha withdrew her lawsuit 3 weeks later. Not because she had forgiven or accepted, but because she had nothing left to fight with. Holden disappeared from the city not long after. A quiet, graceless exit for a man who once carried himself like he owned the world. His company faltered without my father's backing. Investors who once smiled at their parties now turned their backs. Aaron watched the news one evening, shaking his head as they showed Holden outside a courthouse looking haggard and angry. "You know, Aaron said I used to think he was unstoppable." I stared at the screen and whispered, "Everyone looks invincible until the truth catches up." The day after the lawsuit was dismissed, I walked through the house alone. No camera crews, no lawyers, no enemies waiting in the garden. Just me, the old floorboards, and the echoes of my father's footsteps in memory. I stopped in his study and ran my fingers over the smooth oak of his desk, the drawer where he hid the key to everything. The chessboard still sat by the window pieces, frozen mid-game. My father had loved chess. He used to sit with me on long summer afternoons explaining every move, every sacrifice. He'd always say, "The queen is the most powerful piece on the board, Maddie, but only if she learns to move quietly." I reached out and moved the queen forward one square. For the first time, I understood what he meant. That evening, I hosted dinner at the house for the first time since his death. Not a party, not a show, just something simple. Aaron, Danielle, and a couple of neighbors who had known our family for decades. We ate at the long table beneath the soft golden light, the scent of roses drifting in from the garden. Laughter, real laughter, echoed through the halls that had known too much silence. Aaron raised his glass halfway through dinner. "To Dad," he said. "To the man who knew the game better than anyone." We clinked glasses. But in my heart, I didn't just toast him. I thanked him for trusting me, for seeing me, for leaving me not just a house, but a legacy that couldn't be stolen. Later that night, long after everyone had gone home, I returned to the garden alone. The moon hung low over the magnolia trees, silver light pooling across the roses. The white blooms glowed softly while the single red rose stood like a heartbeat among them. I knelt beside it, pressing my hand lightly to the soil. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. My voice wavered but didn't break. "I finally did it." The wind moved through the garden like a slow exhale brushing against my skin. I closed my eyes and let the silence answer me. All these years I thought revenge would feel loud, triumphant, like fireworks in the night sky. But it didn't. It felt quiet, solid, like the roots beneath the roses. Trisha had wanted to break me. Holden had wanted to erase me. But here I was, still standing, still breathing, still mine. My father's voice came back to me not in sound but in memory. "You don't have to scream to win, Maddie. Sometimes the loudest victories are the ones spoken in whispers.